Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:06. It's O'Connor and Company on this Thursday morning. Thanks for tuning in here to America's Morning Show. We'll get you started on your day with everything you need to know, all the smiles that you need on your face in these trying times. Well, I'm counting on you on the smile part, Patrice Onwuka.
I've got you down. I've got you covered.
I appreciate that. Patrice is with us this morning. I'm Larry O'Connor, and coming up in 30 minutes, Walter Banks, Black Minds Matter. We'll talk about the chronic absenteeism problem that Muriel Bowser doesn't really have an idea how to fix. We're not going to really punish the parents involved here. We're just going to persuade them. Okay. 7:05, Cameron Hamilton running for Congress in Northern Virginia. And then at 8:35, Will Hild, Consumers Research. Joining us right now, Patrice, is Sean Kennedy to follow up on that story that we just laid out for you. We're going to start there at least. This whole street takeover phenomenon, not just in Southeast D.C. And it's bad. By the way, if it was just in Southeast D.C., it's still an intolerable mess, and it should be stopped. But we're seeing this in the suburbs as well, including over the weekend, Easter weekend in Fairfax. Sean Kennedy, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and discuss something in my backyard that is fast and furious.
Well, like I said, it sounded like this dystopian version of Fast and Furious. They take over a street, they take over a parking lot in an industrial complex. They're doing donuts, they're doing drag races. The cop pulls up, and then they suddenly swarm around the cop car and they try to break into the cop car. That's absolute anarchy, Sean.
It is. It actually reminds you a lot of what happened during Floyd when we saw a number of cop cars get surrounded and the officers either tried to get pulled out or attacked. But there's a brazenness, the idea that the police can show up to something to enforce a simple law. They weren't necessarily going to make mass arrests or, beat anyone up. They're just going to disperse the crowd, and the crowd's response is to attack the officer, suggests that they're obviously not afraid of the cops.
Well, and I mean, Sean, that's an issue that I raised. This is very similar to 2020 when this type of behavior was excused and even justified on the grounds of race relations somehow. But now we're seeing this popping up. Can you think of any justification for why these young people are doing this other than that they're getting away with it? And also, do we have a sense of where these young people are coming from? Are they native to the area? Are they coming potentially from other countries and just getting involved in bad behavior with those who are already here?
We don't know if they're foreign nationals whatsoever. One of the individuals is from outside of Baltimore, and another individual is from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. And we know this is happening in Manassas in Prince William County. We know it's happening here in Fairfax. It's been happening in Tacoma. So it's happening all over the region, but these are meetups that are being posted, shockingly, online, and then people are swarming those areas, and they're identifying their targets based on availability or where they think that the police won't obviously respond or won't have quick enough response time. So this is region-wide, and in the case of this individual coming from Pennsylvania, he had to drive more than an hour to get to Springfield, Virginia, just to go to this meetup. So, I mean, these are magnets for people. They could be people from all over the world, obviously, involved in these things. And they're choosing their targets because they think that the neighborhood or the police aren't going to react.
Fairfax, I would not. I don't know what would give them that idea. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis at a press conference, although he delivered his words in a rather milquetoast sort of way, he used all the right words. He said the police exist to address crime and disorder. This is both crime and disorder, and I don't know anyone who has an appetite for this to continue. Well, I know one person, Steve Descano. I mean, even if they arrest these people, Descano does not have the track record that he's going to throw the book at them and send a message to the community, does he?
Absolutely not. I mean, these individuals are going to, if they're under the age of 18, they often have records already that are sealed that we can't see. And those that they have caught do have records. We believe the person with the same name from the same area of Baltimore, who was one of those arrested and named yesterday, had serious traffic-related misdemeanors, illegal racing and illegal operation of vehicle, and all these things in Baltimore last year, and he didn't see consequences outside of Baltimore County, but he didn't see consequences. So the idea that these individuals are going to see consequences in Fairfax is ludicrous. Just last week, we had an individual who attacked somebody violently, very violently, was charged with malicious wounding in Fairfax City. And I went and looked that guy up, Javon Sims. Javon Sims has 30-plus charges in a matter of 4 years. Most of them under Toscano, most of them in Fairfax County, including attempted malicious wounding, which, if people don't know, malicious wounding in Virginia is somewhere between attempted murder and an aggravated assault. So it's a serious, serious charge. He had a series of assaults and batteries. He had a number of theft crimes. And none of those were prosecuted. They were all null prosecute here in Fairfax, including, violating his parole and probation. He was sent from Alexandria, where they asked for extradition, to Fairfax, and then the charges were dropped in Fairfax. So there's no likelihood, if this individual is not going to get charges, that the people involved in this street takeover are going to get serious consequences.
We're speaking with Sean Kennedy, president of Virginians for Safe Communities. Sean, something you mentioned earlier, which is that they're using social media to form these meetups. In essence, just to figure out where they want to meet up, target specific areas where they think police are not going to be. There's the punishment element, but is there also an element of how social media can play a role? How should law enforcement be working with social media companies or tech companies to try to get a jump on when these events are going to happen, rather than trying to come in the back end when they hope someone calls the police?
Well, we had an incident in Baltimore last year. It was the worst mass shooting in Baltimore history, which is saying something, where 29 people were injured and 2 were killed at a block party. There was miscommunication there as to whether or not that was happening or not happening. But we know that Baltimore police have a unit that monitors social media looking for likely future incidences, not just street meetups, but in this case, a block party, whatever. Almost all of these large departments have that. So this, in a certain sense, was a failure to get ahead of things like that, because they should be monitoring information that's being put out there on Instagram, TikTok, all these other forums that are discussing their jurisdiction and potential criminal activity they're going to commit in that jurisdiction. We know, obviously, they do this with child sex abuse, where they're looking for people who have some connection to their jurisdiction that are engaged in stuff like that. They have the FBI and other people are doing that. These local police departments have intelligence units, and they should have been on top of stuff like this.
Sean Kennedy's our guest, Virginians for Safe Communities. We've only got about a minute left here, but this issue should be, I'm sure it is, resonating with most Americans, and certainly in this area as they see no real solutions coming up here. Is this being mobilized into any sort of action at the ballot box? I get this sense that there's this quiet resolve of people who see what's wrong. They're not saying much. They're not posting on their Facebook, but they're ready to vote.
I think there is something, brewing. Whether or not that can be mobilized into something real, I don't know. But I was just talking to some parents yesterday at an event for my own kids, and when I spoke to them, they were unaware of some of the sex assault non-reporting that's going on here in Fairfax. Obviously, this case with the woman, Kate, who was sexually assaulted 10 years ago, and the fact that Fairfax County then, subsequent to that, for 10 years, the largest school jurisdiction in the state, did not report a single sexual assault. And I don't mean rape. I mean any kind of sexual assault. They didn't report anything to the state. They said zero. It's ludicrous. But they claimed that, and they got away with it. And these people are firsthand experiencing discipline problems, violence with their own students on their campuses, and they're fed up with it, but they don't know where to turn. They said they reached out to the principals, they reached out to everybody. Who do they go to next? And I think that frustration is brewing, that people who are just regular people, may well be liberal Democrats, are like, this is crazy. And I think the this is crazy effect, at least at the local level, is bubbling up. We're seeing it even in Washington, D.C. I've seen the 2 recalls and some of the other pushback there. People are fed up with this stuff, and they need an outlet. They need to be channeled towards a way to express that discontent.
Well, one outlet is to touch base with Virginians for Safe Communities and see how you can get more information and get mobilized. Sean Kennedy would love to hear from you. Sean, thanks for joining us this early in the morning. Good
Thank you.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Toilet won't flush? Call All Tech Services and we'll be there in a rush. All seasons, all systems, all tech.
Later this morning in the Chris Plant Show, are microaggressions causing Latinx populations to become obese alcoholics? 9 a.m. on WMAL.
You'll remember the summer of 2022 where gas prices were soaring because of this administration's policies, not just the climate change hoax environmental policies that kept new oil exploration from happening, but also sort of stymied the oil companies from continuing to drill for more oil, because why bother when the administration had a jihad against oil and gas? They were making it much more expensive to continue domestic oil exploration. That raised the price of international oil. It funded Putin's war machine as well as the Iranian terrorist machine. Well, the prices were so bad that it was going to affect the Democratic Party in the midterm elections in November. So what did Joe Biden do? He released oil from our Strategic Petroleum Reserve, something that Eisenhower created for in case there was a war, right? He released it to keep prices low. So instead of helping our country at a time of war and national crisis, he released the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help his own pathetic political career. And at the time, he promised that he would replace the oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Here's what he said at the time.
Today, I'm announcing a plan to refill the Strategic Petroleum Oil Reserve in the years ahead at a profit for taxpayers. The United States government is going to purchase oil to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
That's right. We would buy it back at a profit, he said. We'd make it back at a profit. Fast forward to yesterday, where it's announced, dun, 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 they're not going to do that at all because gas prices are still too high. Oil prices are still too high.
Today, the Biden administration announced that it's going to pull back its plans to refill the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You know, they drained that to try and bring gas prices down earlier. Well, they've been trying to fill it back up, but now it is way too expensive. So they say we hit $86 today on the futures market. They say it costs too much, so we're not going to do it. And now is the time of huge geopolitical risk out.
Yeah, it is, because the price of gas continues to go high. So Biden lied. It was stupid. It was inept. There was no reason to do it other than to artificially deflate prices of gas. By the way, it worked. He screwed all of us. He screwed our petroleum reserves, but it did help him in November. So I guess since everything shot through the lens of will it help you win an election, I guess brilliant job there, Joe. Meanwhile, we're all left screwed now.
Yeah, so here's right now, the average gas price is $3.57. We are above where we were a year ago. So, like you and many others listening, I have my favorite gas station that I drive by every day, and I look at the gas prices, and for a while earlier this year, I was saying, wow, we're going to tick under $3 over here, and we did. And then suddenly it reversed again, and now we're back up to about $3.50 and climbing every day.
Right, partly because there's a war in the Middle East, and partly because, again, we're not drilling for our own oil, and the climate change wackos
all of these different reasons.
That's right.
But here's the thing. Those gas prices and rising oil prices drive consumer inflation. It drives the cost of everything to deliver the goods and services that we need, but also just to package and the inputs that are needed. So, the moderating inflation, meaning inflation still rising but not as fast as before, it's not surprising that we start to see it tick back up again. And so this is the Biden administration, they only care about elections. And things are bad if he's not even willing now to refill the strategic petroleum oil reserves because they know they have no money. It's too expensive. But whatever it takes.
But it is too expensive. But by the way, cost has never been a factor in terms of giving cell phones and airline trips and free credit cards and debit cards to all the illegal immigrants who are coming across the border.
Oh, no,
how many
that's never,
billions
never
and billions and billions of dollars are we giving to people who are in this country illegally? That's never, we never told that that's too expensive, but it is too expensive to replace the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. This was Joe Biden's doing. It was his decision to do it.
It was.
He then promised he would replace it. That was a lie. He's not doing it now. So when the spokesperson for Joe Biden was confronted about this yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre, what did she say?
You guys started draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try and help with the Putin price hike a few years ago. Said you were going to refill it, but now it doesn't seem like that's happening. Why?
Well, I believe the Department of Energy is responsible for that.
There you go. It's not us. It's the Department of Energy. Who the hell does the Department of Energy work for? Let's remind you, by the way.
Yeah, I mean...
all of the oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it was all filled up to the top. Couldn't get any more. Who did that? Donald Trump did it. He did it in the middle of the pandemic because as a smart businessman, he saw that oil was at an all-time low.
Based on the price of oil, I've also instructed the Secretary of Energy to purchase, at a very good price, large quantities of crude oil for storage in the U.S. Strategic Reserve. We're going to fill it right up to the top.
And at the time, Chuck Schumer criticized that. He called it a bailout for big oil. But what it ended up being, it was a brilliant thing. Now, if we were to replace the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we would pay more than triple what Donald Trump paid in the first place in 2020. There's never a more stark difference between these two presidents.
There was no need to drain it for political motivations, and there's absolutely a need in case something were to happen for us to have those reserves on hand. By the way, this looks a lot like our military and the weaponry that have, the missiles, for example, that we've been giving away to other countries like Ukraine, and we ourselves are on the back burner. We don't have enough to defend ourselves. So, I mean, I see a trend in the Biden administration. I don't know. Do you, Larry?
It's almost like we have a lousy leader and a lousy government right now under this man. It's 6:24.
Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
6:36 now as we chug along here this Thursday morning. Coming up at 7:05, Cameron Hamilton is running for Congress in the 7th District of Virginia. And at 8:35, Will Hild of Consumers Research. Big shakeup there, or an attempted shakeup at Disney. But Bob Iger and the ESG-CRT-EIEIO faction wins yet again. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Patrice Onwuka. All the letters I can't get straight, so I just assumed
ESG, DEI. I mean, the list goes on.
CRT, LGBT, hi-ho, hi-ho. It's a Disney thing. Joining us right now is Walter Banks, spokesperson for American Federation for Children, and that great group that we love, Black Minds Matter. Actually focusing on great education alternatives outside of the shackles of the public school, government-run school system. Walter Blanks, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, here in D.C., there is an unbelievable chronic absenteeism. It was already bad, but then the pandemic, of course, sent the message to students that school isn't really important. You don't have to be there. 60% of high school students right now in Washington are chronically absent from school. 43% of all grade levels chronically absent. Mayor Bowser is pretending like she has some initiative to fix it, but here's how she described it.
We want to make sure that all of our systems, from the courts, the Attorney General, are using every tool that they have, not to punish parents per se, but to make sure they have the services that they need.
Walter, maybe it's me. I think maybe parents who let their kids go without school should be punished. I mean, when I was a kid, I would go to school, not because I loved it, but because if I didn't go to school, my dad would kick my butt. And if your dad isn't there to kick your butt if you don't go to school, guess what? You don't go to school. So how do we fix this problem?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and no disrespect to the mayor, but you don't get points for making sure that kids are in school. You get points for making sure that they're educated, so that when they graduate, they can be contributing members to society. And yeah, and like you said, 60%. That is absolutely nuts. And we can think of all the initiatives in the world and all of these things, but what it really comes down to is students not being engaged in the classroom and being met with whatever that they may need when it comes to their own learning style. And I really think that's where other alternatives come into play, because if you have students who are engaged, who are excited about their learning, it doesn't matter what their parents are doing, they are going to get to school. And we have a system right now that has no incentive on improving not just the outcomes, but the lives of these students. So they fall to the wayside. And it's really sad, and it's really unfortunate, especially in neighborhoods that I grew up in, right? Running the streets and doing things illegal was a viable alternative because you could provide for your family. You could be out there. So school was an absolute afterthought. But we have to get these kids in school. We have to show them that there's a better life for them if they continue their education.
You know, Walter, what's interesting is the lack of concern about parents' involvement here. She says that you can't punish parents, and maybe that's true, but how do you see parents obviously parents need to be involved. How can they incentivize or nudge parents to be involved? And to me, more resources for parents or the criminal justice system. I don't know if that's really the right answer. What are the ways to really get parents more motivated so that if the parents feel like they have skin in the game, then they'll want to ensure their kids are going to school?
Yeah, well, we often talk about the school-to-prison pipeline and the connections between the two and how, as much as we don't want to admit it, they are very, very linked. And so when you're discussing students, once again, not just being in school, but thriving in that classroom, I believe it would be a great step for the mayor to say, hey, if your kid is not doing well in this school or they're not going to school at all, here are some other options, right? Whether it's a charter school or a magnet school or a STEM school, all the forms of alternatives that we talk about and we're seeing across the country, the mayor needs to step up and take leadership and say, if the current system is not working for you, this is what we can offer. This is what we have left. These are some other viable alternatives. And once a parent sees that, they are able to make that decision. And most parents, honestly, even the ones that are engaged, are probably somewhat disenfranchised and have lost all hope with the current system, and they don't know about all of these other resources. They are strictly in survival mode. And so,
Walter,
in my opinion, if the mayor really wants to make a difference, she would support all alternative forms of education and giving resources to parents about what's available out there.
Walter Blanks is with us, Black Minds Matter. And since the organization is called Black Minds Matter, and you focus, Walter, specifically on educational issues that involve children of color and the issues that are specific to the black community, I got to ask you this racial component to this. I'm a white guy. I live in the suburbs. If I was not sending my kid to school, if I was a homeschooling parent, and it was discovered that I was neglecting my child and not actually teaching my child, and I was just basically, letting my kid languish without any of the basics of education, that's abuse. That is neglect of a child. And I would have to face consequences for that abuse to my child. Why is this different? This whole thing is like, well, let's just make sure resources are there. Let's not punish the parent. No, if you're a parent and you have a child and you're not making sure your kid is in school, you're abusing your child, aren't you?
Yeah, you absolutely are. And it goes back to policymakers really just enabling this kind of mindset. I've had conversations with people who said, well, these poor black kids, they just can't learn. Or, how do we know that parents will have...
That sounds kind of racist.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it is. And so when we're having these conversations, it seems to be, and this was something that my mom thought, because it seems that, well, I came from a troubled home, I'm a person of color, let's just cut him some slack because he's had a hard life. And that's not the answer. And then on the other side, you have some families who have lied about their address so that they can send their kids to a better school and have been sent to jail.
Right,
so we're going to send parents to jail for trying to do everything that they can for their child, but not when they are neglecting them and just letting them run amok through DC. It makes no sense to me, and it's absolutely backwards. And we have gone far, far away from making sure that our children are as well educated as they can be.
We're out of time, but thank you. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Walter.
Walter Blanks, spokesperson, American Federation for Children and Black Minds Matter, 644. And along the same lines of what we were just discussing with regard to these double standards and making detrimental decisions for children shot through the lens of equity and the soft bigotry of low expectations, I believe President George W. Bush would refer to it.
Exactly.
Massachusetts hospitals, Mass General Brigham Hospital. I know that you're familiar with the area and the organization, so I want to get details from you about this. It's a large hospital group They've now made a decision that if a baby is born and it is detected that there are what's called substance abuse disorders, in other words, children were born with drugs in their system. We used to call them crack babies. These are children who are born of addicted mothers who are already born with this toxins in their system, which is an indication that this was a neglectful mother during pregnancy, and that this child, obviously isn't. This used to be this obviously is reported to authorities, Child Protective Services, to investigate and make sure that the child's home is not going to be an abusive one, or one that is going to be one of neglect. This hospital system in the Massachusetts, New England area have now decided to no longer report those babies who are being abused by their parents even before they're born.
My goodness.
Because they say doing so disproportionately affects black people. But by the way, I would argue that it disproportionately helps black babies.
Absolutely.
And gets them into, out of a neglectful and abusive situation. But this is madness, Patrice, absolute madness.
Well, it is. I mean, when you think about the long-term impacts of a child who's born addicted to drugs, I mean, they could have developmental issues, physically, their head size, birth defects, how they grow in other areas could be impaired because they have drugs in their system, and God forbid their parent continues to take drugs, and that child is affected over as they continue to grow. But this is the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is the idea that we can lower the standards and the expectations for blacks, for people who are poor, and excuse bad behavior. In this case, unhealthy, frankly, dangerous behavior when it comes to mothers. Now, you said you talked about this hospital group, Mass General Brigham and Women's. They're one of the biggest, and this group also includes Newton Wellesley, which is where a lot of the upper crust of Boston live. I know that area
Wellesley.
pretty well.
Sure.
And they deliver. They're not just they don't just deliver babies. They're also a massive teaching hospital. So now you are indoctrinating the next generation of obstetricians and OBGYNs with this idea that if you know the mother is doing drugs and that baby is going to be born with drugs in their system, it's okay. Let it slide.
Yeah, and by the way, they're treating it as a health problem. It's not a drug addiction. It's a substance use disorder, they call it. I love that. It's impossible to escape the message that's being sent here by these elitists up in New England, which is if a black baby is born and there's drugs in the system, well, we're not going to report the parents because we don't expect anything more from those people. That's
disgusting, insulting.
It is horrific, and the babies deserve more. But I guess for the people who are in favor of letting these babies, be killed up until the moment of birth, I guess we shouldn't expect much more. 6:53.
Making sense of your world.
And you got good analysis on stuff.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
And I wanted to say how much I appreciate that.
Making sense of the news.
If you hear the